So I want you to imagine waking up one morning and you discover that someone you've literally never met has just decided where you can live. They're telling you who governs your land, who owns your resources, and get this, even what country you belong to. Now, imagine that decision wasn't made by anyone in your community, not your local leaders, not even anyone on your entire continent. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the historical event that systematically dismantled African sovereignty and, quite literally, redrew the map of the world.
Okay, let's really put ourselves in that scenario for a second. Who decides where you belong? For most of us, our nationality and our borders, well, they just feel like permanent facts of life, right? Like gravity. But for an entire continent, those facts were abruptly and forcefully rewritten. Imagine a stranger, completely disconnected from your everyday reality, suddenly holding the pen that dictates your future, your neighbors, and the extraction of your wealth.
And the crazy part? That pen was held over 6,000 kilometers away, nowhere near Africa. It was inside a luxurious room in Berlin, Germany. In just a matter of months, a handful of European leaders completely changed the trajectory of a whole continent. The geographic and emotional disconnect here is just staggering. You had men who had never even set foot on African soil casually sitting around a table deciding the fate of millions of people.
Now, to truly understand the weight of this tragedy, we absolutely have to shatter one of the biggest, most persistent myths out there, the idea that Europeans arrived to this empty, disorganized continent. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. Long before European colonization, you had the Mali Empire, globally famous for its immense wealth and its total control over major trans-Saharan trade routes. The Songhai Empire, it grew into one of the largest states in all of history. Then there's the Kingdom of Benin, renowned for its incredible bronze artwork and city planning that was incredibly sophisticated. And of course, the Ashanti Kingdom, which built up this formidable military and controlled a highly profitable gold trade over in West Africa.
The sheer scale of development across the continent was just staggering. Africa wasn't a single monolithic story. It was a tapestry of thousands of flourishing societies. We're talking bustling trade hubs moving gold, salt, ivory, cloth, iron, and spices. You had thriving cities with actual universities educating top-tier scholars. Independent empires like Ethiopia had a long, rich history of centralized government. In places like the Kingdom of Congo, they were already maintaining global diplomatic relations with European kingdoms way before the colonial era even began.
So you have to ask, why did Europe suddenly become so aggressively interested in conquering these established societies? Well, it all kicks off with the Industrial Revolution. Factories across Europe were absolutely booming, and they needed enormous quantities of raw materials just to keep the lights on. We're talking rubber, copper, cotton, palm oil, gold, and diamonds. All of this stuff was becoming incredibly valuable. On top of that, having overseas colonies was the ultimate flex back then. It was a massive symbol of military strength, economic power, and national prestige. These European nations were fiercely competing with one another, and suddenly, 19th century explorers had mapped out these vast, resource-rich African territories.
So, with countries like Britain, France, Germany, and Belgium all practically salivating over a piece of this immense wealth, this frantic rush into Africa threatened to spark a massive, all-out European war. To prevent that, in November 1884, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck decided to solve the problem by, well, calling a meeting. He invited representatives from 14 countries, including the US, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire, to Berlin. The official reason on paper? To establish clear rules for trade and colonization in Africa to keep European powers from going to war.
But here is the absolute kicker. Out of all the countries that attended, one major group was entirely missing. Zero. 0 African kings were invited, 0 African queens, 0 African chiefs. Think about that for a second. Not a single representative from the hundreds of diverse African societies whose lands, resources, and futures were being fiercely debated in that room was actually allowed in that room.
Inside that room, the delegates hammered out these ruthless new principles for claiming territory. And the most devastating one was a concept called effective occupation. Basically, this meant a European power could officially claim African land simply by proving they had real control over it, either through administration or a military presence. They just studied maps and made deals. But the profound tragedy here is how those borders were drawn. They were proposed with virtually zero regard for the existing ethnic groups, the languages spoken, the deeply established trade networks, or the historical boundaries that were already thriving on the ground.
And the rules they agreed upon? They sparked a frantic, honestly terrifying rush. Within just about 30 years following the Berlin Conference, roughly 90% of the entire African continent had been swallowed up by European colonial control. Put that into perspective.
An entire massive continent systematically subjugated in just a few decades.
The scramble for Africa had officially begun. You had Britain expanding its massive footprint across Egypt, Sudan, South Africa, Nigeria, and more. France swept in and established control over vast stretches of West and Central Africa. Germany, Portugal, and Italy were aggressively claiming whatever territories they could get their hands on. But perhaps the most notorious example was Belgium claiming the Congo Free State. This was put under the personal control of King Leopold II, and historians note that under his regime's forced labor and widespread horrific abuses, millions of people died. It was a rapid, brutal race to occupy and extract.
Now, it's crucial to understand that Africa did not simply surrender. An incredible, fierce wave of resistance swept across the continent. These communities fought back relentlessly. You had Samouraï Touré, who battled French expansion in West Africa for years. Baibouré fiercely opposed British forces in Sierra Leone. The Zulu kingdom put up a legendary and fierce fight against British expansion during the Anglo-Zulu War, and in 1900, Ya Asantewaa heroically led the Ashanti resistance against British rule.
And perhaps the most legendary story of defiance from this era happened in 1896. Emperor Menelik II led Ethiopian forces to a spectacular, truly decisive victory over Italy at the Battle of Adwa. It was one of the few completely decisive African victories against a European colonial army during this entire period. This monumental win allowed Ethiopia to preserve its independence, and it proved to the whole world that colonial conquest wasn't just a walk in the park. It was met with powerful, determined, continent-wide defiance.
So what does this all mean for us today? Well, the Berlin Conference did way more than just divide territory on a piece of paper. It completely reshaped millions of lives, with consequences that are still enduring today. Those arbitrary lines drawn in Berlin, they often forced together communities with totally different languages and histories, while painfully tearing apart groups that had long-standing deep connections. Entire economies were aggressively restructured, not to help the local people, but purely to export raw materials straight to Europe. European languages and legal systems became deeply embedded, and decades later, when African nations finally fought for and won their independence, most of them had to keep these inherited colonial borders just to avoid sparking even greater regional conflicts.
But as we reflect on all this, we really need to keep a broader perspective in mind. The story of Africa is not only a story of colonization. It's a rich story of powerful kingdoms, determined resistance, triumphant independence movements, and ongoing renewal. That one single meeting in Berlin, as devastating as its impacts were, did not erase Africa's enduring civilizations, its vibrant cultures, or its sheer resilience. You know, history isn't just about what happened in the past. It's the absolute key to understanding why our world looks the way it does right now.
Which leaves us with one final, vital thought to ponder before we wrap up. The next time you look at a modern map of Africa, take a really close look at those borders. Ask yourself, whose history are you actually seeing? Are you looking at the natural evolution of ancient, powerful societies, or are you just seeing the permanent ink of a pen held in some luxurious room in Germany all the way back in 1884? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the map and keep seeking the full story.